Hello everyone, welcome to the CUHK Business School. I'm Edwin from Department of Finance. Today I would like to give you a mini lecture, Investment Criteria. Any firm possesses a huge number of possible investments, so you need to think about which investment should you invest. And in finance, we have several criteria. Now I want to present and compare a number of different procedures used in practice, so including net present value, payback rule, and IRR, internal rate of return. So the differences between an investment market value and its cost is called the NPV, net present value of the investment. So for example, let's say Zuckerberg used US$ 19 billion to acquire WhatsApp. But if WhatsApp only worth 18 billion, should Zuckerberg invest in it? Definitely not, right? Because you know that actually we are paying for 19 billion for a stock that worth only 18 billion. Therefore, we know that the value is actually negative 1 billion. So what we know is that NPV tells us how to measure the value that we can create or add today by undertaking this investment. So therefore, for NPV, it is very important in our capital budgeting process. Capital budgeting becomes much more difficult when we cannot observe the market price for at least roughly comparable investment. So previously we say that if we know about the value of WhatsApp, we can actually estimate it. But what if we don't know about the value? Then in this case, we will have problem in estimating the NPV. For example, let's say if you want to evaluate OpenRice value, that is quite hard, right? But at least if we can actually make some projection, for example, you make some assumption and then project the cash flow, we can use the DCF analysis. And the DCF analysis means that we are going to compare the present value of projected future cash flow and the cost, so that if the net value is positive, we would like to go for the investment. Then we know the first rule. An investment should be accepted if the NPV is positive, and we should reject it when it is negative. Now let's take this as an example. Suppose we believe that the cash revenue from our fertilizer businesses will be $20,000 per year. And at the same time, in each year, we also need to spend cost of $14,000 per year. And we decided to wind down the project in 8 years. Then we can estimate that the plant and property and equipment will be worth $2,000 at the 8 year. If now we know that the project costs us $30,000 to launch, so should we invest in it? Then we still need to have one more figure, which is the discount rate, and assume that the discount rate is 15%. So is it a good investment? Let's do some calculation. Now we know that in each year you have 20,000 revenues, and then deducting the 14,000 costs, we know that the net cash flow in each year is $6,000. So $6,000 cash flow, and then adding the $2,000 salvage value at the 8 years. And after we do the discounting, we find the present value. We find that the project worth $27,000. So it seems good, right? But don't forget, we also need to invest $30,000 at the beginning. So that's why the net present value is actually negative $2,400. Then in this case, definitely it's not a good investment, and you would like to reject it. So that's just the example how we can use NPV in our investment decision. So let's say if the company have 1,000 stock outstanding, then our best estimate of the stock price reaction is that 2,400 and then divided by 1,000, it means that we can estimate that the stock price will drop by 2.4 after the announcement. So that's why if you're the CEO, definitely you don't want to go for this investment. Then let's take this as an example to illustrate again how can we use NPV in our decision making. Now suppose we are asked to decide whether a new consumer product should be launched. So based on the projected sales and costs, we expect that the cash flow over the 5-year life of the project will be $2,000 in the first 2 years, $4,000 in the next 2 years, and $5,000 in the last years. And this project cost us about $10,000 to begin the production. We use a 10% discount rate to evaluate. So what should we do here? Should we accept the project? So here is the projected cash flow. We can see that at the beginning, you have negative $10,000 cash outflow, and then $2,000, $2,000, $4,000, $4,000, and $5,000 cash inflow. Then again, we do the discounting. We find the present value of all the cash flow. We find that the present value of all cash flow worth $12K. And then because you only need to invest $10K in this project, so good, right? Because now you find that this project helps you to generate $2,300 net present value. Therefore, this is a good investment. So after talking about net present value, I'm going to talk about a more common rule, which is called payback rule. The payback rule is the length of time it takes to recover our initial investment. So it means that it estimates how many years do we have to wait until the accumulated cash flow from this investment equal or exceed the cost of investment. So based on the payback rule, an investment is acceptable if it is calculated the payback period is less than some pre-specified number of years. So let's do this as an example. Let's say if you invest $50K, and then in the first year you get $30K, second year you get $20K, third year you get $10K, and fourth year you get $5K. So let me ask you this question. How many years do you need to wait to get back your investment? Right, 2 years, right? The payback period here is 2 years. So let's say if your boss requires a payback of 3 or more years, then we will say that this investment is acceptable. Now suppose if we change the initial investment to $54K, then you may think that, okay, this 2 years is not enough, but 3 years it seems to be more than enough. Then we can do some calculation here, and we should be able to find that the payback period should be 2.4 years. So it means that if the payback requirement is still 3 years, we would like to accept it because 2.4 is lower than 3 years. Now let's take this as an example. So under Tai Heng, there are a lot of restaurants, and you can see that actually Manhwa Bing Tang has a relatively lower payback period. You may wonder, how come it has a lower payback period? Because what we know is that when we go there, actually we just spend about $40 to $50. So if we just spend $40 to $50, it means the revenue is not that much. So how come Manhwa Bing Tang still have a relatively low payback period? The reason is that revenue equal to what? Revenue equal to price times quantity. So even though the price that they can get from us is not that much, but because the turnover rate, so it means that there are a lot of customers per day. That's why, because they can serve more customers, and so even the price is not that much, the overall revenue is still a little bit high. That explains how come Manhwa Bing Tang is now quite common, and you can always see them maybe in Mong Kok or Tsim Sha Tsui. Let's take this numerical example to understand how can we estimate payback rule. Now we have 5 projects. So if you require a payback of 2 years, which project would you invest? Let's take a look at the first project. So for project A, the payback is 2.6 years. Then in this case, should you invest in it? For project B, never pay back. You can see that you can only get back $70. So definitely you don't want to invest in it. And for project C, you need to spend the whole 4 years to cover it. That's why the payback rule is 4 years. How about project D? It seems quite strange. You got the first payback at 2 years, and then because you have another negative $200 cash flow in the third year, so that's why you have multiple payback. That's why we say that payback rule doesn't guarantee a single answer. And how about project E? Project E, 0.5 years. So based on our analysis, it seems that project D and project E meet our requirement because the payback is equal to or less than 2 years. But if we use payback rule, which project should you invest? Definitely you would like to go for project E because it has the shortest payback period. But does it really make sense? Okay, now assume that the interest rate is 5% and we are going to calculate the net present value. And you can see that actually project E is a bad project because project E has 50 million negative cash outflow. So therefore, in this case, you should only accept project A. So that explains sometimes even payback period is simple, but it may not give the correct investment decision for us. So that's why, apart from payback rule, we also need to know how to use NPV. Then the next one I want to talk about is IRR, internal rates of return. Internal rates of return is the rates of return that summarize the merits of a project. So it's very straightforward. So based on the IRR rule, an investment is acceptable if the IRR exceeds the required return, and it should be rejected otherwise. Let's say you want to start a bubble tea shop and then you expect that the return is 10%. If the lending rate is 8%, then you may think that, okay, it's still quite good because I can earn 2%. But if the lending rate is 12%, there's no point for you to borrow at 12% and earn only 10%. So that's why IRR will give you an intuition that whether you should go for the project. And then after you compare the return with the cost of funding or after controlling the risk, you should know whether you should accept the project or not. So that's why it can also describe how high the discount rate would have to be before this project was deemed to unacceptable. For example, based on this case, we know that if the lending rate is more than 10%, you will just reject the project. So for project with initial cash outlay, it is the return of investment. For project with initial cash inflow, it's the cost of borrowing. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean that IRR is the higher the better. So it depends whether you're investing or borrowing. For example, in this case, you paid $100 at the beginning and then you get back $120. Then in this case, you are doing investment. So that's why, let's say the T equal to 1, then it means that this is the return for you and you can generate 20% return. So that's why if we are talking about investment, what you should do is that if the IRR is higher than some specified return, you should go for it. But let's say if you are doing some borrowing, then actually the IRR means the cost of borrowing. So that's why this 20% is charging on you. And in this case, you would like to have a lower IRR because it just means that you pay less interest expenses. The IRR and NPV rules lead to identical decision as long as two very important conditions are met. We would say that IRR and NPV are very close to each other, but we should only use IRR in some cases. First, the project cash flow must be conventional, meaning that the first cash flow is negative and all rest are positive. Like the first one, you can see that in this case, you are doing some investment. Then you can use IRR. But in the second case, you can see that you actually get some money at the beginning, and then you pay some money at the end. Then in this case, what you are doing is borrowing some money. And in this case, we would like to have a lower IRR, not high IRR. So that's why we cannot apply the IRR rule. And then this one going down, up, again, is not conventional. And try not to use IRR in this case. The second is that the project must be independent, meaning that the decision to accept or reject the project does not affect the decision to accept or reject any other. Let's say if there are 3 projects, A, B, and C, and I will provide you the NPV for different projects. So in this case, project A, great, because the NPV is positive. B is also great, because the NPV is positive. But if you can only choose one, then we will want to choose A, because A generates more value to you, which is equal to $800 present value. But how about IR? Let's say A, B, C. Then in this case, if the discount rate or the required return is 10%, you would like to go for A and B. But if you can only pick one, then you may want to pick B. So in this case, we find that there is a conflict between NPV and IR. And whenever there is a conflict between NPV and IR, what we should do is to follow the NPV rule. I would like to use this example to illustrate why IR doesn't work when we're talking about some unconventional cash flow. Now we have 2 projects, A and B. A, you invest $100 at the beginning and you get back $100.30. For B, you get $100 first and then you pay $130 at the end. Now suppose the required return for each investment is 12%. According to the IR rule, which project should we accept? So based on IR, both are 30%, right? Because 130 divided by 100. So that's why you should like to accept both projects. But how about NPV? So here, I will provide you NPV. You can see that NPV A is 16 and NPV B is negative 16. So it makes sense, right? Because when we require a return of 12%, then for project A, you are making an investment. So in this case, the 30% is investment return. Investment return higher than benchmark, definitely good. But how about for cost of borrowing? If you just want to have a borrowing cost of 12, but they charge you 30%, then you want to reject it. So that's why IR rule doesn't work when we are dealing with unconventional cash flow. So in this case, if we follow NPV rule, we should only accept project A. Now I'm going to show you whether people in the industry are using Payback or NPV. What we can learn here is that Payback rule in 1959 is quite common, but then it keeps dropping down to 1981. But for IR and NPV, people keep using it more commonly, and you can see that when we are in 1981, IR 65 and NPV 16. And I can be sure that right now, 80 or 90% of CFO or management actually using IR and NPV to make their decision. So why there are more and more people use IR and NPV? What I can think about is that maybe they know more about finance. When they know more about finance, and then they can make wiser decision, so why not? I also hope that today's lesson can make you to know more about finance. And one day I can meet you in CU and to teach you more about finance. So bye.